Incidentally, I have a tendency to get my hand on front of my face all the time. If you see that, make a motion like this or something.
will,
Remind me that
Because if you do, you're going to
I'm
block
always
the
going-
microphone.
Pardon?
I said I would notice because if you did, you would block the microphone and
I
I
see.
would tell you. So
I see. Well, I've done it.
You've
I've
been
done it.
pretty good.
I've done it quite a bit in the previous things. It's just a habit I've always had, of just having my hand somewhere around my mouth.
Well, getting back to what we were talking about before.
Are you on?
What's that?
Is that on?
Yeah, I just.
I wish you'd turn that light on.
You want to see it?
Yeah, I'd rather know it.
Hold on.
Why'd you turn it off? So I wouldn't know that you're sneaking movies of me?
No, I didn't.
When I'm off my guard?
I didn't even know it wasn't on.
Oh,
I turned it off last time,
yeah, I know you did.
but this camera gets used between.
Mm-hmm.
us.
Okay, what were you saying?
That. Well, the one question I wanted to follow up with about talking about the 30s and the Depression, just to finish that off, was what, from your perspective, what was, people's point of view about, did they think that it was going to end? Did everyone feel like it was going to get better? Or was everybody just kind of resigned to the fact that they were just going to have to struggle until they got along? Or how did you see maybe other people's?
Well, I think most people basically were hopeful that there'd be a change, and every little thing that they read in the newspaper, like a plant starting up or something, would give them a new spur of hope. The hope was there, but also with a lot of shattering disappointments, because the tendency particularly through the first several years of the Depression, through the middle of the 30s, was things were slowing down. Plants were closing. The economy was dribbling down. And it had started low enough immediately after the stock market crash in '29. And it was back in the 30s, the next year, the results of that crash was starting to be felt already, because businesses were closing down and everything else. And so I think everybody had a little bit of a different reaction to the news of the day. If the news was bad, of course everybody was down in the mouth, naturally. But then again, if most of the news was up, they'd feel better. That's speaking of the population in general. But the individual people, it's a little different thing. It's like me. When we were back in Davenport and I didn't have a job, I was out of a job, I was pretty despondent. But then my Uncle Hugo would call up and say, "Hey, I got a job for a few days, you want to work?" And all of a sudden, my spirits are soar, So individually and on a private basis with each individual, they vary. But in the beginning of the Depression, the variance would be down, because the things were getting worse. And from the 35 on, there was more hope because there were evidences. For example, some of the things that Franklin Roosevelt, I never cared for Franklin Roosevelt too much, but he did do some good things. He was much too socialistic, and he put in a lot of socialistic things in, which at the time everybody fought, but at the same time, they were a good thing, and they're still with us. Many of his things are still with us. Anyhow, that PWA and WPA thing, for example, and the CCCs, where they get the kids to go out in the camp, work in the mountains, and things like that. They give the kids something to do. They brought a little money into circulation, and so forth. And so this stuff happens from 35 on. And I don't know, there may have been the end of the spiral downward and started something of a spiral upward about the middle of it. I don't know that it was very great, but the thing that really made the big difference was when the war started. When Britain told Hitler, if you attack Poland, we're going to end the war. And so when Hitler attacked Poland, British declared war. But they needed everything. They needed everything. And so we were the source from where all this everything was going to come, you know. At Lockheed, for example, we had a Lodestar, Lockheed Lodestar, which was about a 20-passenger commercial airplane. And it was a good airplane. Another version of that was the one that Amelia Earhart used all the time. And Howard Hughes, both of them setting records and doing things. Lockheed was a big name in airplanes in those days. So Britain wanted us to convert those Lodestars to medium bombers or small bombers, which we did. We made bombers out of them and sold them to Britain. And so it was with a lot of other companies. They would change over from regular commercial production to wartime production. And some of it wasn't too much of a change, like automobile companies, so forth. They've already got the wheels, the chassis, and everything else. All you got to do is put a little something else on the top of them to satisfy the services. But other things just had to be made out of thin air, you know, that guns, we hadn't been making guns or anything for a long time. We were a peacetime economy for years. So to build all the machinery and everything else, to make guns and everything else was a big deal. So all of that added up, started to getting us out of the slump, you know. And there started to be jobs around places. And when I went to California in '40, things were really jumping down there. As I already mentioned, Lockheed Lodestars were being converted and so forth. And there was other aircraft companies out there. There were several. I think for a given region, I think they had more aircraft companies out there than they had anywhere else in the country. So they got a boost right off the bat. And so it was with everything else. And finally I lucked out. In November, when I got a job out there at Lockheed, I got onto a payroll for the first time in a long, long time. And so it was with everybody else. And then along with that, war production, people coming into California, for example, required more houses and everything else to take care of all these people. So the housing business started to boom. One thing added upon another. By 1941, everything's rolling pretty good. As a matter of fact, they're clamoring for people. And at the same time, we are losing our young men to the services. And so that's how the women came into the industry, to take the place of all these men that were going into the services. Lockheed was one of the first started hiring women, and we hired a bunch of them. And my job, among others, was in photographing all these women at work for magazines all over the country, clamming for pictures of women in plants, you know. And so I was busy. And I loved the work, I really did. Lockheed is the only place that I worked for a company in my entire life. The rest of the time I worked for myself. And but I enjoyed it, I really did. I had a good job over there, and I had a lot of freedom, a lot of friends. And so the war, to me, was not hard at all. In fact, it was an enjoyable time for me. It seems a horrible thing to say in view of what was going on in other parts of the world. But it wasn't only me. I mean, most of the people on the home front were living well. And they were, after having those 10 years or more of depression, now they have money, you know. And so they could do things that they had never done before. And of course, a lot of stuff was rationed. Couldn't buy gasoline without, you couldn't buy shoes, you couldn't buy meat. Oh, it goes on and on. All kinds of things that you could not get without a rationing coupons. So that deterred you from spending too much money because you couldn't get a lot of these things. Butter, you couldn't get butter. I got to stop.